a retired Superior Court judge, still a member of the California High-Speed Rail Authority Board of Directors after 3 years as chairman from 2006 to 2009.
And what titles did you have when you were in the state legislature?
I was chairman of the State Senate Committee on Transportation from 1987 until 1998, and I was on the Senate Budget Committee from about 1992 to 1998. I was on the Joint Budget Conference Committee from 1995 till 1998. I was a member of the Revenue and Taxation Committee, Local Government Committee, the Toxics and Pesticide Committee, and some select special committees. I was chairman of the Select Committee on Information Technology.
And when you were supervisor of San Francisco, had you served time on either MTC or ABAG, and if so, when?
I was a member of the San Francisco Board of Supervisors from 1971 until December 1st, 1986, at which time I was sworn in as a member of the California State Senate. And during my service as a member of the San Francisco Board of Supervisors, I served as an alternate on ABAG 1 year, which I think was about 1973 to 1974. I was appointed as the Board of Supervisors designee to the Metropolitan Transportation Commission in 1976, and I served until I departed for the California State Senate on December 1st, 1986. And I served as chairman of MTC from 1983 until 1985, and before that I was vice chairman. I used to pride myself by saying, I think accurately, that I served on every major regional agency board in the Bay Area. I was a member of the Bay Conservation Development Commission for 6 years. I was on the Bay Area Air Quality Maintenance District for 20 months. I was a member of the Bay Area Rapid Transit District Board of Directors for about 22 months before it became an elective position, which precluded me from holding it as a second elective office. I was president of the League of California Cities Peninsula Division. I was the San Francisco Board of Supervisors designated the Executive Committee of the County Supervisors Association of California, and later I was both vice president and then president of the County Supervisors Association. And I was on the Golden Gate Bridge Highway and Transportation District Board of Directors from about 1977 till 1986. And I had not only the opportunity to associate with other legislative leaders from the counties and cities in the 9 Bay Area County region, but I also had a time to do some preaching about the need for more cooperation and more action on a regional basis. And it was valuable to me, and I like to think that it had some beneficial effect on the then 6 million plus people who live in the 9 Bay Area counties.
Why do you think regionalism is important to them?
Because there are an awful lot of people crowded into 9 counties. Sure, some of the counties are large, such as Santa Clara and Alameda, Contra Costa. San Francisco now has about, I guess, 800,000 people, and some are smaller, like Napa and Sonoma and Marin, and some are in between, like Solano. But existing in this kind of, relatively speaking, cramped geography is difficult for human beings. You have, first of all, the need for employment and the ability to travel to and from places of employment and places of doing business in the course of your employment. You have the condition and the quality of the air in the Bay Area and its effect upon the health and the welfare of the 6 million plus people living in the Bay Area. And you have other systems that traditionally are sponsored and are the responsibility of city or county government or special districts, such as supplying water, such as sanitation removal, and other kinds of services which are a part of it. And you can't do it just on your own, because take the Bay itself, take San Francisco Bay. We discovered finally in the 60s what had been done to the quality and condition of the Bay, and that led to the McAteer-Petrus Act, the Bay Conservation Development Act, and regulating uses and restoring the quality of San Francisco Bay. Now, you can't duplicate that with transportation, which is a multifaceted activity of government. But as some kind of analogy, you don't simply build roads and highways. And people in the Bay Area and elsewhere in our state and probably our nation discovered that with the consternation over the effort to build a freeway through San Francisco, through the western addition, all the way out to the western part of the city where I live. That didn't happen because people realized the intrusion. Now, that takes a collaborative effort. It takes cooperation, because somebody living in Oakland probably wouldn't care if you put a freeway through Golden Gate Park, for example, on your way to reach Ocean Beach to go surfing on a given day, something along those lines. But people in Oakland have to pay attention and care about what happens in other parts of their Bay Area environment, including San Francisco, and vice versa.
So when you look back at the 50-year history of ABAG, what are some of the things that you consider to be real highlights?
My service on ABAG was in a lesser role as an alternate to then Supervisor Bob Mendelson, who was our primary delegate. But it did instill in an early part of my service in both local government and later in state government the fact of cooperation and the fact of a effort that needs everybody to respond. An area I think of with respect to ABAG is, of course, housing. And not everybody can live in a fancy high-rise in San Francisco for economic reasons alone. And not everybody should be subjected to unsanitary conditions, living in dilapidated housing. And the state and the federal government, but the state has set up legislatively a system for allocating housing, and that's done through regional agencies in the Bay Area. It's the Association of Bay Area Governments, and that was striking to me as an endeavor that required regional cooperation. And that means, for example, that a city like Atherton can't be simply for million and multi-million dollar housing. It has to assume a responsibility for housing which can be afforded by people of modest or very little financial means. That was a lesson to me. We also had a regional agency whose responsibilities arose from ABAG, and that dealt with sanitation in the Bay Area. I served on that with then Mayor Jack Malatester from the city of San Leandro, who was the chairman of that particular agency, and that emanated from ABAG. And it's just as clear as can be that you have to cooperate with respect to disposing of effluents and disposing of garbage and waste. And that was an initiated process that ABAG can claim responsibility for. And it's far from over in terms of increasing population. Nevertheless, we've decreased the amount of waste, but it's still an intricate subject and it's a complicated subject. And ABAG has contributed, I think, considerably to solutions.
So if you look back at the 40 years of MTC's existence, what accomplishments do you think should really be highlighted?
I think, among other things, the delivery of federal and state funds in a logical way, without rancor, and without much division. I served 10 years on MTC. That's a substantial period of time. That's a decade. And those kinds of responsibilities could have resulted in acrimony. And there was little acrimony. And there was a high degree of attentiveness on the part of the commissioners on MTC, and I consider that an accomplishment. MTC, pursuant to legislation which I successfully introduced in the state Senate, has led the effort for a common ticket for a purpose which is manifest, and that is to ease the burden of people who want to use public transportation, whether it's light rail or whether it's heavy rail like Caltrain, or whether it's BART, or whether it's one of the bus systems which exist in the MTC 9-county area. That is exceedingly significant as far as an accomplishment is concerned. And there are refinements as technology changes and technology improves. MTC tried with my legislative leadership to narrow the number of operating agencies in the Bay Area, which is still too large, is yet too large because it hasn't changed. With approximately 28 operating agencies, there's built-in inefficiencies. That's why some of these bus systems, for example, in the North Bay have such a terrible fare box recovery ratio. And MTC has a future in terms of consolidation. Now, another achievement has been the reconstruction of the Bay Bridge. I consider that an achievement because Caltrans fell down on the assignment, in my opinion. And I had utmost respect for the greatest bridge engineer of my time, who was James Roberts of Caltrans, but as the main author of the legislation, I felt let down by what happened with costs. And of course, then we had undue political influence by a couple of major city mayors of Oakland and San Francisco that contributed to it. And the transfer and the assumption of that authority by MTCA was, to me, therapeutic, because with all the vicissitudes of the laborious and the frustrating and the very expensive process, MTC in effect took on an assignment that hadn't been planned back in the 60s at the time federal legislation created the requirement of a regional planning and programming agency in transportation. And it'll be a happy day for MTC and all of us who use the Bay Bridge on the day of completion and opening.
Talk a little bit about BART to SFO.
It's a complicated history. The concept of BART originally, at a time when the concept included 5 Bay Area counties, not just Alameda, Contra Costa, and San Francisco, but also San Mateo and Marin County, envisioned BART traveling to San Francisco Airport. And don't forget, that was the 1950s when air traffic was much, much, much less than it is today. I was appointed to the BART Board of Directors in January of 1973 by the San Francisco Board of Supervisors as its representative, and served until November of 1974, at which time, with my full support, it became an elected board thanks to state legislation and the voters of the three counties. An airport focus is just natural in terms of a light rail system. And in the 1990s, at the time I was chairman of the State Senate Transportation Committee, I became concerned about the fact that the plan to extend BART southward from Daly City did not include a station inside the airport. It wasn't BART to SFO, BART into SFO. And unfortunately, we had general management at the airport itself which didn't want BART inside the airport, and would have forced people to leave a station about a mile, mile and a quarter west of the airport and then transfer to another form of transportation. That retards ridership, clearly. Anyway, it was eventually the people of San Francisco who voted yes on an initiative that I sponsored that was on the ballot in June of 1994, and voted no on a competing initiative sponsored by that general management at the airport and the airlines, and the mechanics union was defeated by the voters, and that led to San Francisco Airport having a BART station, which now produces the highest fare box recovery ratio of any operating form of transportation in the Bay Area. The fare box recovery ratio for the service of BART into San Francisco Airport is now 93%. That means 93% of the expenses of that operation are recovered from fares. Nobody is close. BART as a whole has a fare box recovery ratio of about 60%, which is the highest in the Bay Area. But that doesn't even come close to what that SFO operation recovers by way of fares. And what it means is people like it and they use it. And there's no better form of compliment to me than to have someone mention that who remembers my participation and maybe even leadership in ensuring the occurrence of that. And then with respect to high-speed rail, well, it's a concept I first saw personally back in February of 1982 on my first visit to Europe, visiting my son, who was then in a language study abroad program out of Dartmouth College at the University of Lyon, and I had the experience of taking the TGV from Lyon to Paris about 6 months after it had opened, which in turn followed the opening of the Shinkansen system in Japan in 1964. And I was a believer in high-speed rail from then on, and it was fortuitous. While I was chairman of the State Transportation Committee, I was foresighted enough, I guess, and I was able to introduce legislation. It wasn't easy. I had 3 bills before 1996, at which time the California High-Speed Rail Authority was established, and it was given the assignment of implementing high-speed rail from Southern California to Northern California, a bill signed by then Governor Pete Wilson. And I expect that we will start construction of part of the first phase from San Francisco to Anaheim in September or October of 2012. And it'll be 2 years of construction for that first section, which is more of a test track section, north of Fresno to Bakersfield, about 125 miles, and Thereafter, from Bakersfield to Los Angeles to Anaheim, and then Fresno to Merced, and then over the Pacheco Pass to San Jose and to San Francisco. And all of that should be open for revenue service by the year 2020, and portions of it that justify revenue service in terms, again, of fare box recovery will be open from 2018 on.
So I don't know if you're aware, but especially more recently, MTC and ABAG have really started working more cooperatively together on a number of strategies here in the region, including the Sustainable Community Strategy. Tell me your thoughts on that.
I think it's logical. I think it's logical, and I think ABAG should have a strong role in implementing that, and MTC, in terms of transportation, affects other aspects of living in the Bay Area. It affects, obviously, the quality of our air. It affects, obviously, the ability to produce housing that can be affordable to people of all income levels. It also has a role in education, obviously. So many people in both high school and in university and college age groups use public transit, and that means MTC. And ABAG, of course, can preside from a higher point in terms of its role in programming and establishing policies than even MTC. But I think that it is an appropriate association, and I hope that that association is strengthened as the years go by.
Well, you know, they've recently sort of also included BCGC in the Air Quality District, and so now they call themselves One Bay Area. Your thoughts about the future of regionalism?
It's indispensable, and it is One Bay Area, and it's composed of a good many cities, 9 counties, a good many special districts, but all of them are related in terms of everyday existence and everyday duties and everyday activity. And it's altogether fitting that there be a unified leadership, and the expression itself, One Bay Area, gives voice to the fact of air quality, of transportation, of housing, of sanitation, of recreation, even of education, in terms of what it means to live in the Bay Area, whether it's San Francisco where I live, or whether it's Clayton and Contra Costa County, or Redwood City and San Mateo, wherever it may be, or Napa, where my daughter lives. We all have an obligation to one another to live the best kind of life in terms of comforts, comfort of clean air, the comfort of rapid transportation, the comfort of health and safety arising from a common investment and execution of waste and sanitation responsibilities. So that is the future. That is the future. And I can recall back in the 70s thinking and talking with a couple of people who were on city council or a different county board of supervisors about experimenting with the idea of forming a governmental consortium. As I recall, it was done in Toronto, and I think the province of Ontario authorized that kind of management of regional interests, and then that kind of discussion dissipated. But it may be revived under that rubric of one Bay Area, which is altogether proper. In the state, I think that probably is the case, that the Bay Area has led the way with regard to regional cooperation, and the word regionalism is a good way to express it. I can't testify about the rest of the nation, but certainly for purposes of comparison, I think that we certainly are at the top. When I think about other large counties in the Southern California area, which in a way have a more difficult time of it because the geography is different and the areas are larger than we are in the Bay Area. It isn't so difficult for us to assimilate geographically. And with high-speed rail, it could be even easier to do that.
Doug, what else do you want to add?
Well, I'm an admirer of MTC as a governmental entity. I think that MTC has had first-class leadership going back to Joe Bort, Bill Lucius, Al Gatoff, and other people of that caliber in leadership positions. And the staff has been first-rate, always first-rate staff. And it hasn't been prolific in terms of numbers, but MTC staff carry out and execute their duties, and they do it in a competent fashion, always have. And so I'm happy to forecast a continuing, exciting, and rewarding future for MTC, rewarding for the people of the Bay Area.